Hello and welcome to what is episode 10 of our Healing Conversations. After again a reasonably long interval between episode 9 and this one, but it tends to have its own schedule. And welcome back to my dear friend and colleague Rachel Singleton. And we're going to share what's just become visible to both of us in our own individual ways, and also just through conversations that we've had around the theme of illness and healing and all of that, and just the evolving perspective that we both have on this now. So yeah, welcome back, Rachel. Nice to have this conversation with you again.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, it's lovely to be here. Yeah, I think we just get this little nudge here and there, don't we, that we need to have another healing conversation. And perhaps part of the nudge for both of us recently has been our own experiences of being unwell. And you did that quite spectacularly, it has to be said.
Yes. And I wouldn't have been able to have the conversation in the midst of that because I was too busy coughing and yeah, feeling like I was dying or whatever. But even in the midst of it, I think there was an awareness, and that's part of what, to me, the value of these conversations provides. There was an awareness of, let's call it a bigger picture, or other forces at work, rather than seeing it as, oh, I've got the virus that's going around. What, how can I get rid of it? Basically, which tends to be the popular attitude towards what we might call seasonal illnesses. I mean, what I had was, I started with just felt like a cold and became like congested sinuses. And then before I knew it, it was in my chest and in my lungs. And which is not the first time I've experienced something like that. But the speed and the severity of it kind of caught me unawares. And so there was a period of having to get used to the fact that, oh, I'm not going to be over this by the end of the week. And then subsequently, actually, I'm not going to be over this by the end of the month. There was a kind of incremental surrendering to the severity of it and the depth to which it was really impacting me, which I was reluctant to surrender to initially, as we often are. I was just postponing things till the following week. And then the following week came, I was like, actually, you just got to cancel everything and forget any idea about when you think you're going back to normality, because it's not happening. So yeah, that was my recent version, which, well, maybe there'll be more. I'm sure there'll be other things I can share about that. But you too, you've had your own adventure and healing journey.
Yeah, it wasn't anything like as severe as yours, but it was I think one of the things that really struck me about the experience I had, I seemed to again start with a cold, then went into flu-y, fevery, aching all over kind of symptoms very quickly within a couple of days. But then what happened was I started to get nerve pain sort of shooting all around my head and my face, which went on for 3, 4, 5 days, I think, in the end. And the pain of them was so severe. Anyone who's ever had toothache knows how harshly intimate it is when it's right in your face and in your head. And they were, yeah, I never knew when the next one was going to be. And I think that, one of the things that prompted me to want us to have this conversation was this sense of, and I'm going to say it kind of flippantly, how to be ill well. And I don't mean that people are going to have a checklist and say, am I doing my illness well? I'm not talking about that. There's no test here. What I'm talking about is, how do we meet illness when it comes? Because we can feel, just as you were sort of describing there, we can feel like, oh God, this has happened and I need to just deal with this and then I can get back on with real life. And there's that sense of, my real life goes in this direction. This thing has taken me off into a siding. And when can I get back to my real life? But actually, it is the thing that has happened next. It is real life. And the way that we try and sideline this part of our process and part of our development is interesting, because what if we need to meet it in a different way. And for me, by the time I got to the real pain part of the illness, I had really surrendered. I'd kind of seen, okay, I'm properly ill. I'm gonna, like you said, I'm gonna cancel things. I'm just gonna give myself the space and the time. There is absolutely nothing I can do whilst this is going on. And when the pain came, I am not good with painkillers. They don't work well in my body. So I knew I wasn't going to go for anything like that. I did use some homeopathy, which was helpful and could take the edge off it at times. But there was nevertheless an intimate relationship going on with pain that I couldn't get away from. And what I started to experience was that when that pain came, that initial feeling was, I want to contract and move away from it in some way within. And the only thing that actually worked and helped was to do the exact opposite. And the way that I kind of thought about it was to let every cell of my body open to this and take the hit, so that kind of inner vastness of who we are really was, I was accessing that to let myself just open and let the pain in. And the moment that I met it in that way, it changed, the specific feeling of it immediately began to morph. It immediately began to change shape. I couldn't quite pinpoint where it was. It began to diffuse through my body more, and it would quickly then ebb away. And so at no point, and this really struck me, at no point did I feel like I was holding myself in tension against the next wave of pain that might come. And I thought that was quite remarkable given the intensity of it, because I know in the past I have done that if there's pain in my body. And each time it came, there was just this resistance and then remembering not to resist. This tightening against and then remembering to open. And all of me could handle that pain, but the tight little constricted part of me couldn't. It just made the pain worse. It amplified it. It became the thing that was happening in me. But when all of me met it, it's like it had room and it had space, and it could be what it needed to be and move on through as it needed to move on through. So I almost felt like I was meeting that as part of myself that needed to express itself. And that felt very different from shunning it, pushing it away, trying to get rid of it, trying to get through it as quickly as possible. And yes, I still wanted to get through it. I didn't want to linger there for months. But I wanted to hear what it came to say and to let it do what it needed to do in my body to help me move through whatever was going on there. So it felt really profound, it felt like a real gift to sit with something that was repellent and that my body was trying to actually distance itself from, and say, well, it's here. It is the next thing that's happening. It is exactly where my path has taken me. And what if this is for me, not against me? What if this is vital to my growth and my being? And since then, I felt that sense you can get after an illness of being quieter and deeper and more aligned with yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that, Rachel. I know exactly what you're talking about there. It's like it's been an initiation into a deeper experience of yourself in some sense. And in that respect, there is no the notion of just getting back to normal, which is what the mind tends to think needs to happen, right? And my mind too was, attached to that idea for a little while, even though I knew it was completely unfeasible. you come to see subsequently that's not really what it's about, and that there isn't a going back to. I mean, people experience this, people still talk about this with reference to the period where we went through, collectively lockdowns and so forth with the COVID situation, and how people had to let go of that idea, of going back to normal. And when there's a surrender to that fact that we're not going back, it's not happening, then something else opens up, some other possibility opens up, which you can only then, in a way, you can only see that when you open to that possibility. You start to realize, not only am I not going back, I don't even want to go back. There's another place that I'm moving towards, which is, I'm only on the very beginning stages of it being visible to me, or feeling my way into what that looks and feels like. But you start to get a sense that there's a directionality here, and that what you've just been through is part of what kind of resets you. It realigns you with where you're heading. I had exactly the same kind of, even though my illness experience was different to yours, I had a similar feeling of being reoriented by having gone through the illness, such that when I came out of it, and this is still true to now, even though, I've been relatively well now for getting on for 4 weeks, I haven't gone back to how I was before. And so there's still that sense of, for me, it feels a bit like I'm in the awaiting further instructions mode. I'm not quite sure what's different, and which of the balls I need to pick up and run with again, and which ones they're just gone, and actually I can't pick them up. So I've been looking at, some of the things that I would typically be doing at this point in time, organizing workshops or, this kind of thing. And I've just noticed my energy is not quite there for doing it. And it's not that I feel a lack of energy, it's just that it doesn't quite want to go there. Yeah. So I was like, well, where does it want to go? And writing appears on the horizon, and I feel drawn to do some writing more strongly than I did before. And it's just getting that sense of like, oh, something shifted here. Yeah. And part of what has brought about that shift is this journey of what just looks like illness from a external perspective, and yet it's done something internal. It's moved things around and reordered them and reorganized them. And so there is that feeling now of getting used to a new way of being in the world, which still feels a bit unfamiliar. And I'm feeling a bit tentative and uncertain. I don't quite know where I am, but it's okay. It's and it doesn't feel bad or wrong. It feels like the beginnings of starting to see what was the necessary recalibration, that going through that process of just, being required to surrender everything for a while. Probably if we did that voluntarily more often, maybe we wouldn't need to get quite so ill. I don't know.
Yeah.
But who does that voluntarily, right?
Yeah. It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because I often think of yin time, that our lives are largely yang. They're very active and purposeful and goal orientated and scheduled and this, that, and the other. And how often do any of us take quality yin time apart from when we're asleep?
Right.
Time to really deeply settle in and be quiet and listen. And it seems like modern life is less and less set up for that. I remember as a child, long stretches of boredom. I can't remember what boredom is anymore.
No, I haven't got time to be bored, right?
I know. But that sense of just, I remember I used to sit on the windowsill and just look out for hours, just look out at nature and look out at the stars at night. And there was that quiet time where there's a sort of reordering going on in your soul and things are settling down. And I look back on this period of illness, and there's something mysterious happened whereby some of the more unclear or entangled psychological threads, that maybe one or two things that were going on in my life, that I wasn't massively conscious. They'd maybe been there a long time and I wasn't really thinking about them a lot. And then I've had this illness and now I feel a resolution in those things. So here's my life going along with these things happening. Here's this illness. It wouldn't seem as if the two have anything to do with each other. And yet in the quietness and the stillness and the going inwardness of that time, things have aligned and untangled and resolved, and that are deeper than my body, that are part of my being. And that's, yeah, that feels quite miraculous, really. And I think we, coming back to this sense of how we can see illness as something that's inconvenient or wrong or not what should happen next, I think there's also subtly or not so subtly some kind of dialogue that goes on around it not being very spiritual to be ill, and especially for people who've got a chronic illness, they've obviously got some work to do on themselves yet. And there's something harsh about that. And I think that if we're finding ourselves lapsing into that kind of thinking, then we really are setting ourselves against receiving the gift of the illness. It seems to me that illness is an entirely spiritual process. And that if we are given the gift of it, then we are being invited very deeply into ourselves. Now, we may be sick of being invited there, and we may be feeling that we've been invited there a lot of times, and are we going there again? And yes, it would seem we are. And that there's something here that we keep coming back to as we're talking, which is about this sense of when we surrender and we drop those thoughts and we drop that resistance, something can start to happen that's beyond the appearance of this just being the virus that we've caught or the chronic illness that's having a flare up or whatever it is. It's not that superficial. It's a deeply personal, integrated experience, and it is the next step in our evolutionary process, and we would do well to meet it.
Yeah, well said. Because it's what's happening anyway, right?
Exactly.
And I think what you're flagging up is that the invitation is for us to meet it consciously, to willingly, to willingly embrace the fact that this is part and parcel of what is supposed to be happening in our life right now. And those of us who are, when you mentioned like the spiritual aspect and that possibility of getting into the mindset that this shouldn't be happening to me because, there's all kinds of many different reasons why we think that that's the case. But also I think for those of us who are in the healing field, that's a very common story that we're telling ourselves, or that other people will project onto us as well. That, it's like, well, but you're a homeopath and you know this, and you've been, you know everything about holistic healing. It's been your work for the last 30. How come you're still getting ill? And it's kind of a lack of recognition that suffering is part of life, and it's an essential part of life. And it's not something that any of us can avoid. The shape and form and duration of it varies. But suffering is built into life. That's one of the conclusions that I've come to. There isn't anyone that I've met ever who doesn't suffer at some point in some way. And, and that it's not just once. It's not just that you have one thing and then you get over it and then the rest of your life is smooth, easygoing, nothing difficult is ever encountered. Suffering, in my sense of it now, is that it gets evoked when it's needed. And why would it be needed? Because it seems to be part of the fertilizer for growth.
Yeah.
That's how I would think about it. And I suppose one of the things that I've started to notice more and more and it's been helpful working in the field that we work in, because you notice it in other people often before you see it in yourself. But now I can see it within myself as well. When illness arrives uninvited, which it's pretty much always uninvited, right? None of us welcome it with open arms. We're just like, oh, I've gotten sick. What I'm interested to see or to notice is, well, what does it require of you in the first place? Example for me, one of the things this illness required of me was to ask for and receive help. And often it's something like that. It's something that we're not that good at doing the rest of the time, or that we're reluctant to do.
Yeah.
And so it requires us to move in a direction that we've been dragging our feet. But also you can ask, well, what does it enable? Because being sick enables certain things to happen as well, like enforced rest. Would be, for me, that was the case. Or we talked about the word surrender. That's part of what it enabled for me, was just a complete letting go of all responsibilities, and everything that I thought I should be doing had to be let go. It enabled that. That complete putting down of everything for a period of time. You can also look at it from the perspective of, what does it prevent? What does it stop you from doing that you would otherwise be busying yourself doing? That's quite clear. And what does it activate in you? One of the things I noticed, and I know you and I had a few conversations about this, my dream world became completely crazy. Which was interesting, because it was simultaneous to the fact that consciously I felt like I was losing my faculties. There were periods where I couldn't really think straight at all. I literally didn't have the energy to think very well consciously. And there were points where just even the idea of just holding a conversation with someone was more than I could contemplate. So I couldn't do it. I just had to go days without even speaking to anyone, or even thinking about speaking to anyone. Was too much. That was literally too much cognitive activity at that time. And yet, in the periods when there were snatched periods of sleep. I wasn't hardly sleeping at all, but it was very sporadic. But in the periods of sleep, I would just go in. I was like, as soon as I would fall asleep, I'd go into this dream realm, which was so productive and vivid, and in many ways so informative of what you might say was like the deeper rhythms that were being played out. It's no wonder I didn't have the energy consciously. There was enough going on in the unconscious realm, and again, it's somehow like being ill enabled that, and it made that very visible to me in a way that I normally I can go long periods without even remembering what I've dreamt. That stopped being an option. It's like the problem now is, can I even write them down, because there's so much of it. So that was really interesting to see that certain other things are actually being activated or brought into awareness that otherwise we wouldn't make room for, or we wouldn't give any attention to. And all of that's happening by itself. It's not happening by our own volition. We're not willing that to happen. We're not intending it. But that deeper, I don't just want to call it unconscious, but it is largely unconscious, that deeper intelligence that knows what's required of us at this stage in our growth, in our journey, in our evolution. That's what's doing that. It's it's taking the opportunity to not only kind of recalibrate us and to require us to let go of the things that we don't need to be burdened with anymore, but it's also bringing things to our attention that we maybe wouldn't otherwise be even willing to look at.
Yeah, beautifully put. I love the aliveness of your examples as well. Yeah, because I've been also thinking how there are certain things that happen during an illness that don't easily happen otherwise, you know. And for me, it was around just the real settling into yourself, you know, the real quietening down. You've got nowhere else to go. You've got to come back to yourself. And then within all the sort of processes, whether it's dreams or whether it's meeting pain or whether it's asking for help, or, you know, there's so much that's happening that's sort of humbling and settling and consolidating. And, you know, that whole thing, it's like there is a spiritual opportunity there that is fully taken advantage of without us having to do anything about it. And I think there's the capacity for a real deepening of our trust then in the way that life works at such times. I really felt that this time. I felt that I don't have to fight this or fret against it or try and push it away. I knew enough at the start of this illness this time to say, this will be good for me. This will be good for me in ways I cannot yet foresee.
Yeah. Me too. I was struck by my own lack of anxiety.
Yeah.
About, you know, given the severity of the physical side of what I was undergoing, you know, when I kind of was able to describe it to other people, they were often quite anxious on my behalf because they could see how sick I was. And I wasn't. There was that trust. And I think that is something that we kind of gradually develop through experience, isn't it? You know, it comes through experience and deeper understanding. I'm just remembering now as we're speaking that you talked about that, you know, when do we get time to just sit and stare out of the window? I did a lot of that. I spent whole days literally just with my head in my hands because it was too heavy to hold my head up without support, literally just staring at the window with almost nothing on my mind. You know, it's like there wasn't extra energy to do much thinking. So I was just staring and kind of looking out. But the other interesting thing that I noticed was when it was at its peak, which was probably a period of about 10 days, and I had this very, very, very severe cough. I mean, I've probably only had a cough like it maybe once or twice in my life. The only thing that I could do to, it didn't stop the cough, but the only thing that I could do to be with it in a way that was okay was to get down on the floor on my hands and knees. And it was only sometime afterwards I realized I was basically in the Muslim prayer position for a big percentage of time during this ordeal. And I thought there's something in that for me as well. You know, I can't see that as coincidental.
Yeah.
But that's the position that my body was put into. It's basically get down on the floor and pray, you know, or at least get into the position of prayer.
Yeah.
And you know, in the Muslim countries, they do that voluntarily 5 times a day. Well, I was probably doing it at least as often as that. Not so voluntarily, at least not at first. But I actually came to realize that was the most helpful position I could get into. I was still coughing my guts up, but at least I was able to expectorate and so forth. And oftentimes I would just stay in that position even when I wasn't coughing, just because it felt like the right place to be. So that's only something that's just dawned on me since that somehow getting in touch with that regular place of prayer, let's call it that, seemed to be part of what was required of me. And maybe it's required of me ongoing. I don't know.
Yeah. And, just to that and the staring out the window, how would that have possibly happened in normal everyday life otherwise?
Right. Exactly.
This is the thing, it breaks the chain.
Yeah.
It breaks the chain of what we were doing, and some of the mindlessness of how we can just fill the day and not be reflective and quiet. So there's something, very profound about that aspect of it. And one of the other things that strikes me as you're talking now is how, I don't know whether you felt this, but there were things like that you've just explained that now you can see, obviously with hindsight, you can sort of see the significance of them. I can see that about things that happened to me during the illness I had, but at the time, that they didn't feel symbolic and significant necessarily. That might creep in after a while, but it just felt like the next bloody thing to deal with, There's that sense of we don't know that, we haven't both had some magical experience of being ill. It's like it was gritty and uncomfortable and messy and unpleasant, and that is part of it as well. There's something about the realness of it that is humbling, and that pulls us back into a more gritty relationship with ourselves and with our body. So, there's this, it's almost like this coming back to the body, coming back to the being, and really being called here and paying attention. That cannot help but result in some kind of reset. How can it be otherwise? When those chains and links of just going about our business, brushing along, dealing with whatever comes as it comes, when that's stopped, when that's halted, when we are brought into connection and reflection, then the impact of that is so powerful. And that is the healing right there. That's what's really going on. The body's doing its stuff to work through, but what's really going on is this deep aligning.
Yeah. Yeah, and its nature to me is it's an initiatory rite of passage, if you like, which perhaps because we, societally, we've neglected initiatory rites of passage for a long time now, at least to a large extent. They've fallen by the wayside. It's not something that we collectively see as being necessary or desirable, or that we've got time for. And that, I think, that has left a big void. And to me, things like this, going through an illness that requires all of the features that those initiatory traditional societies recognize are part and parcel of going through an initiation. What are they? Things like suffering is typically part of that. There's often fasting. I was required to fast.
Me too.
Basically for about 10 days. I just literally couldn't eat. And again, that's something that I'm reluctant to do voluntarily, but there was no question about it. I just literally couldn't put food in my mouth. Endurance is another feature of initiation processes. You've got to stay with it longer than you think you're capable of.
Yeah.
Right? To really get to the breakthrough point, you've got to stay longer than you think you can. And again, we don't do that voluntarily. We stay with things a little bit, and then we get busy and get back to what we think is more important. And then, of course, the surrender aspect. There's in initiation, there's always a requirement to let something go, to put something down, and to leave it there, so that when you come out of that journey, there's been an unburdening of some in some sense. Something is left behind that you don't bring back into your life.
Yeah.
So to me, you know, when you go through an intense illness like you and I have both experienced, and many, many people are experiencing their own versions of
Time,
this.
yes, yeah,
Many, we both know, you know, countless individuals. Um, it's fulfilling that role if we can have, if we have the willingness to see it that way.
yeah, yeah. I love that reading of it. Yes, that makes so much sense to me. Yeah, and also, you know, I think one of the other things it brings that those initiatory experiences would bring is that we are going into the unknown. And again, through an initiatory experience, there's a voluntary aspect of going into the unknown. It's involuntary when
Yeah.
when we're called by illness,
Yeah.
but we we don't know where this is going. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what's going to happen next. There's fear. There's we are going into physical and psychological territory that we may not have traversed before.
That's right. It's a death and rebirth of sorts. Yeah. And I was very struck by when I first went into the illness I went into, I kept getting images of like Grim Reaper images coming to mind.
Yes.
Um, Very strong.
Yeah.
And not, it wasn't anything that scared me or terrified me, but I couldn't escape its attention. It was requiring my attention to consider the death element in what was happening and what was about to happen, to include the death element, which again, societally and collectively, we try and exclude as far as possible from our conscious awareness. We don't include and embrace the death element. We try and avoid it. We try and work around it. We try not to talk about it or even think about it. So it, you know, it comes in unbidden, uninvited,
Mm.
because it's part of life. It's a necessary part of life.
So it touches every area, really, doesn't it? You know, within ourselves, but also without, because, you know, there's that sense in which, as you were saying, that we need other people to help us when we're incapacitated, or in pain or struggling, or it changes our relationships as well. And in good ways,
Mm.
you know, there's, yeah, there's no area that this doesn't really touch. I've been thinking so much of late, you know, of how many people are ill these days. And yeah, we can say it's winter bugs going around. As if it's got nothing to do with our own evolutionary path as individuals.
It feels like such a dismissal when I hear that. You know, it just feels like a superficial dismissal of what looks to me like a much more meaningful and important experience. Like, why are you treating it so superficially? It's just, you know, oh yeah, I had that bug as well. Like, what are you talking about? You know, to me that I simply cannot relate to it on that level at all anymore.
No, no, no.
It almost feels insulting.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't mean to me personally, but to the process itself. It feels like an insult
Mm.
to dismiss it as, you know, something in such a superficial way.
Yeah, it does diminish it.
Mm.
And the sense that there's a lot of it going on in the people around us, you know, that many people are therefore having or being invited into this process is interesting, you know, and it isn't always that people are having a physical process. It might be a process of mental anguish, you know, with
Yep.
different kind of suffering, but the fundamentals are still the same, that there is a requirement that we drop in to meet this.
Yeah.
And that in doing so, it is not what it first appears. And we are just about to embark on a journey. And we're going to come out the other side of it very different.
Yeah. And I think just having that context for illness and the healing that goes together with it, it does change it. It just, you still go through it, doesn't stop you from having that experience, but it puts you in right relationship to it.
Mm.
And I think that's perhaps what we collectively need to relearn now is that there isn't a place we get to where suffering stops happening, or no one ever gets ill. No, there's a place we get to where we can get into healthy relationship with suffering and with illness. And when, as an individual, what's so helpful to me is to have friends like you, Rachel, and our other close mutual friends who we can remind one another,
Yeah.
because we all forget that. From when we're in the thick of it, it's very easy to forget that perspective, and just to have someone else hold that mirror for you, to me, is probably one of the most helpful things that a healer and a helper can provide.
Yeah, me too. Right back at you. I really felt that as well. And it feels deeply reassuring when you're in that space. And that sense of right relationship, of coming back into right relationship. We so obviously aren't in many ways at this time in right relationship with our world, with our own bodies, with our own being. And if more and more people are being called to have a bout of illness, go through a process like this, then maybe that's part of a more collective rebalancing that's going on.
Yeah.
And, that helped me as well in the middle of this, the sense that that was the case, that it wasn't just that I was being ill for my own personal evolutionary journey. It's the sense that you can't do that and not impact the collective.
Mm.
You can't go deeper into yourself and settle in more and have more respect for yourself and your body's process and more trust in life and more awe of the mystery of it without that vibrationally tweaking the collective as well, So it isn't just something, we're moving away from saying it's something that happens to us to saying it's something happens for us, and that it's actually something that's part of a deeper resetting.
Yeah.
And at
Exactly.
each stage, doesn't it just get more meaning?
That's
you
it.
know,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's happening through us collectively, and yeah, the degree of awareness that we can bring to that is the degree to which we can participate consciously. And as you say, that conscious awareness does ripple out, and we can also, as best we can, through our own lived example, we can show people another possibility, another way of being. When illness does arise and suffering arises, we can show that there's a way of being in relation to that, which I don't want to say it makes it okay, but it, at least you'll have the sense that there's gold in it, there's juice in it,
Mm.
there's growth in it. It's not just meaningless, it's not just bad luck, it's not just misfortune. And she was saying right at the beginning, it's not just an interruption or a disruption or a distraction from what you should be doing. This is it.
Yeah.
This is exactly what you should be doing right now, is being ill and engaging with it and experiencing it fully. And as you said, collectively, looks like that's exactly what we're supposed to be doing right now.
Yeah, that's the role. Yeah.
That's why so much of it's happening right now.
And I want to just have a word towards those who are who have a more chronic illness going on, because obviously we're speaking about something acute. We're by and large out the other side of it. But, for someone who is in something that feels much more long term and is much more long term, then how does that person keep renewing their sense of surrender, and keep being okay with it? And the invitation to surrender there is a deep one, but the reality is the only thing we are ever dealing with is this moment,
Yeah.
this fresh moment. And this fresh moment requires of us that we understand that it's all there is.
Mm.
As we rest in this this now. This is all we have ever. We can think about a past, we can think about a future, but the only thing we have is this fresh, scintillating, unwritten now, and this moment leads to everything else. It's the nexus, you know, everything else comes out from here. So the only thing we have to do is inhabit this now from a space of openness and trust and wonder and curiosity, and be with it as best we can. And you know, my own experience of having chronic pain in the past, I called on that when I was going through this acute pain this time. You know, I thought, wow, I've learned so much from that about how to be with this now in this moment. But it's the same lesson. It's like soften to what is, you know, just when I felt a defense come up, I felt a tension, a knottiness in me. I went towards the knot and melted into it. I let the knot be, and in letting it be, it disappeared. It's that all we're ever meeting is what is and our resistance to it. And we can always soften we can always soften in our resistance. We can always give more space to allow what is to unfold and reveal its gifts to us. And I find that there's great hope in that.
Oh, beautifully put. Yeah, absolutely. That's the case. And thereby we can have a fresh experience, even of something that we've lived with, you know, we've lived with it being a certain way for perhaps months or years. We can still have a fresh experience of it in this moment.
Yeah, because we think we know it, but we don't.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful place to conclude this conversation.
Let's do that. Well, thank you everyone who's watching or listening. And yeah, we hope that this helps, and do get in touch with either of us if we can support you further in this.
Yeah, and if you find something helpful in these conversations, just, you know, put a little message on after the video and let people know. We always love reading comments if people find this helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Rachel.